Hello, secondary educators, and welcome to this overview of Getting Reading Right, filling in the gaps in the secondary classroom. I'm Jessica Sullivan, Secondary Literacy Coordinator for the Reading Language Arts Unit at the Los Angeles County Office of Education, and I am going to give you a brief overview of the course so that you can decide if it's something you'd like to participate in with us. So here's a question for you. Have you ever had a student who you suspected struggled to read the material in your class? Of course, I would assume the answer is yes. And I'm thinking you likely have had lots of students who struggle. I know I most certainly did as a teacher. And that's really why this course was developed, so that we can all learn ways to fill students' specific reading gaps. And we can probably all agree on this claim that there are many elements that come together to create a literate child. And there's all these factors on the screen here that play a part in the puzzle of reading. But to be honest, we can remove any number of the pieces, literate homes, love of reading, and so forth. But if students still have a strong classroom reading instruction, they will still learn to read. But the reverse is not true. If we remove systematic and explicit tier one reading instruction from the puzzle, most humans will never learn to read proficiently. It's the one essential factor. And it's also the one factor that we as educators actually have control over. As secondary folks, we sort of have always assumed that this would be attended to at the elementary level. But as a state, we've struggled with K-5 reading instruction too, and this is shifting now, which we'll get into in a minute. So a few years ago, as a county office, we wanted to support K-5 reading instruction by bringing the science of reading research to teachers. So we began with an elementary cohort of Getting Reading Right. That project is now in its fifth year, and we're seeing districts all over the state changing how they teach reading to a more systematic and phonics-based approach that's called structured literacy. And we were also awarded a $5 million grant for that work. And now county offices across the state are using our training program to build a shared understanding of how to teach reading effectively in elementary. Through that, we had a lot of secondary folks attending the training because they wanted to learn about it too. And as a middle school teacher, I totally understood that because I never had any training about how to actually teach older students to read. I mean, things like giving a diagnostic assessment and then having strategies or curriculum to address specific older readers' struggles. Absolutely not. I didn't have any of that. And even though I spent many years being a tier three reading interventionist at the secondary level, I did a lot of what I would call teaching reading by the seat of my pants. Has anyone else tried to do that? I had no real idea of what I was doing aside from saying, read a lot, read more, I'll read to you. Let's use scaffolds. And here's a graphic organizer. And all of that was well intended, but it didn't, big surprise, fix the problem. So fast forward to learning about the science of reading in my work here, and now we actually do know what to do. So all of that led us to the Getting Reading Right, Filling in the Gaps in the Secondary Classroom series, which we hope that you will join us for. This training is for any secondary teacher who wants to know what to do to help struggling readers in their classroom. It's not program or curriculum specific, and the strategies really do apply to any discipline, any grade level. So we welcome you no matter what grade level or content area you teach. Let's shift gears and think for a minute about what a struggling older reader looks like. What comes to mind? Probably the ideas on the screen are some of the ideas you had, and they're pretty common with older kids. Older students' symptoms in struggles look a lot more than just that they have a hard time reading and writing. We often see compounded issues and behavioral issues worked in. But let's hop into the shoes of a struggling reader for a minute. We tend to think that if a kid can read with, let's say, 80% accuracy, that's going to be pretty good, right? It's a B in our grading system, so they should be okay. But I'm going to give you a sentence from chapter 1 of the Scarlet Letter, and it's going to show how a student would understand a passage with an 80% accuracy rate. So go ahead and read this passage. The red words are representing words that a student doesn't know. How was it? Did you notice how difficult it was to get through that? What I noticed was that I couldn't even remember what I was reading between those unknown words because too much attention was being spent on just trying to decode and understand what the red words were, which even once I did decode them, I still didn't know what they meant. So I still struggled. So I guess my main sentiment after reading that was yikes. Now let's try the same thing, but with 90% accuracy. Let's see if that's any better. It's easier, right? But still cloudy. And it's just getting at the gist of comprehension. And that's really not what we want for our students. And interestingly, it's not till we get just about to 100% accuracy that we as humans are able to read quickly and seamlessly. Even the smallest obstacles in reading can cause big disruptions to comprehension. So we've just experienced what it's like to not read with fluency. And it's really tough for us all to imagine what being a struggling reader is like when we are all skilled readers ourselves. It's hard to remember what it was like learning to read when we learned, for many of us, a long time ago, and maybe don't remember how we came to become readers. And it almost feels like we should be able to say, just try harder or read more. But if you think about it, no amount of scaffolding or trying harder or reading multiple times for the text on the screen here was going to make up for the fact that in that first example, especially, we couldn't make sense of those red words. So giving us a graphic organizer or some other scaffold or even reading it aloud to us wasn't really going to help if we couldn't get past some of those red words. And we certainly weren't going to be thriving reading the passage on our own. And interestingly, here are some of the traditional ways that we try to cope with struggling readers at the secondary level. And the problem is that these are all compensatory strategies. They're well intended and kids can get through text with these. And honestly, they are what we've been taught to do at the secondary level. And they're not bad. It's just that they're not filling reading gaps. None of these strategies here are going to help me, if I'm a struggling reader, go out on my own and fully comprehend a text or fully comprehend that red text that we saw on the last slide. But what could we do if we could actually, what if we could actually give a quick assessment to older kids and maybe have an assessment that showed us specifically what the problem was for students? That'd be great, but still not enough. And what if we then could have a handful of strategies to use that would fill the gap for students? Would you do it? I bet so. I mean, I most certainly would, mostly because it would mean that when those gaps are filled for students, they no longer need all of those scaffolds and compensatory strategies. So we can focus our lessons on the actual content. So the path to learn all of that is really through understanding the science of reading and how the brain learns to read. And without that, we're just guessing at students' problems and trying to help them limp along. And that's what most of us in the secondary level and even in the elementary level have been doing for the past many decades. So I just mentioned the term science of reading, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard that term before, but what it refers to is this huge body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. And it includes research from the last 5 decades from a variety of fields like psychology and neurology, linguistics, education. There's a vast amount of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develops, and also why some students have difficulty. And then most importantly, how we can effectively address those issues through assessment and solid teaching practices. But sadly, this information hasn't made it to most classroom teachers in California. It's just now spreading across the state of California through some grants and concerted efforts by reading advocates like us. And right now, it's largely focused on elementary for now, but we know secondary is going to follow. So you are ahead of the game by looking into this now. So kudos to you. But let's dig a little deeper. When we really look at the brain science of how reading works, we see that unlike learning to speak and understand language, learning to read and write is not a natural process. Oral language is natural. We begin speaking as toddlers simply because we've been immersed in language. But that's not true for reading. You can't put a child in a room full of books or even in an environment that's rich with reading, and they magically learn to read. They have to learn the code of reading. So, for example, this is what happens in the brain, and this is what we go through in our course. When little kids learn to read a word like bat, first they have to hear the sounds, which is called phonemic awareness, and then they can match the sounds to the letters. So they have to know that that sound B matches to the letter B, and the sound A matches to A, and T matches to T, and that becomes bat in the word that we hear and the word that we see with BAT on the page. And We talk in depth through our course about how this process works, not just for one syllable words in primary grades, but more importantly, how this process works for kids through every grade level and content area as they're tackling new words at any level. The same brain processes come to play. But I know that I never knew anything about any of that when I was in the classroom. So we talk about that a lot in our course. Let's talk more about what you could actually expect from the sessions if you decide to join us in this Filling in the Gap series. So first off, the course is 10 modules of content, and we have 3 models for taking the course. The first is our summer boot camp, where we have half days on Zoom for 1 week. The course is 10 modules, so we do 2 modules a day, and we finish the whole thing in a week. You can join in your PJs if you want because we're on Zoom. The second option is our year-long consortium, and we meet for that one once a month, August through May, for 2 hours each on Zoom. And this option is for those who want to take it a little slower. Maybe they want to implement the practices as we go, a little each time throughout the year. And then our final option is a customized cohort. So for this one, we gather teachers from the same school or the same district, and we do a cohort of the training just for your people at a time that makes sense for your district. So it could be during your early release days or on a PD day in the evenings over the summer, you name it. We also customize the content to include your specific assessment tools, your curriculum, your district initiatives, and then you can really build a common language across your entire staff and work towards system-wide improvement, which is amazing. But regardless of which model you choose, our meetings begin the same with a self-assessment on the day's topic. So we ask our participants, what do you already know about this topic before we begin? And then we revisit that same self-eval at the end of the session so that you can see how your knowledge has shifted. So these evaluations are just for you. You don't turn them in. We can't even see them. They're just a way for you to track your own learning and take the pulse of what you already do or don't know. Each module, we also have a specific topic that we build your knowledge around. So sometimes we'll have articles to read about the topic. We may have videos. Often we have an optional breakout room, but we know that sometimes you come to a session and you're not feeling a breakout room. So we're never going to force you into a breakout room. We'll always have a couple of options for you. Sometimes you may feel like talking with others and others not, other times not, and that's okay. Every session will also be sharing instructional techniques and vetted resources so that you can immediately put your new learning to practice. This isn't just a knowledge building course. It's really about learning how to adapt instruction in ways that are going to meet the needs of your students and fill their reading gaps. So we'll be ending every session with action steps that you can take and also an implementation guide so that you can remember what you're supposed to do, as well as what the key learning from that topic was from the day. And anyone who attends all 10 modules of the course gets our fancy dancy purple Getting Reading Right secondary badge. It is a micro credential that you can add to your email signature, your LinkedIn account, your resume, to social media, wherever you want. And you can have a proud stamp indicating all the hard work and knowledge building that you've engaged in to ensure that older readers gain proficiency in literacy. So let's talk a little deeper about what we actually do in the 10 modules of the course. Every module has the same structure. We really want participants to understand the components of skilled reading and how those components apply to the secondary level. So we'll be learning about the progressive skills of reading each month. And then we really do include every content area in the work. We like to say that if your content area requires reading, writing, listening, or speaking, this training is for you. So we will be learning together how to pinpoint specific reading gaps so that we're not just relying on compensatory strategies or guessing to help kids limp along, but rather we're identifying specific issues and closing those issues for students. And every month we'll be discussing practical, clear strategies that can be used in any content area. We'll discuss how to meet students' needs. It's really not just here's one more thing to add to what you already do. We're going to be talking more about strategies that you can do within what you're already doing to help kids access the material and to close reading gaps. It's also worth mentioning that this Getting Reading Right course isn't only about filling gaps for strugglers within our secondary classrooms. It's also about learning research-backed strategies for covering grade level content in a manner that assures accessibility, equity, and proficiency for every student. So this is not a course only for teachers who have strugglers in their class. This is a course for teachers who want to have the most effective and efficient teaching practices to get the most big bang for their buck in literacy instruction. Let's dig in a little bit deeper. As part of the Filling in the Gap series, you get all kinds of goodies like our monthly self-evaluations that I mentioned a moment ago. These help you keep track of your learning. We also have implementation guides that I mentioned. Those close out every module and they highlight the key points from the session. They give you a big chunk of information in the middle that will help you to further your learning. If you're interested in learning more about the topic, we like to give articles and podcasts and videos and lesson plans and lots of different ways to access learning more if you're interested. And then the bottom is the most important part that tells you what the take action now steps are so that you can go back to your classroom and know exactly what you're supposed to do to put your learning to practice. Each session, we also, like we mentioned, share loads of free resources that you can use right away in your classrooms to put your learning to practice. And then finally, every participant gets a fun course-themed notebook to capture learning from the series. You can take notes in there. And all of this goodness, aside from the notebook, is housed in a shared Google Drive that we use all year and we add to throughout the course so that at the end of our modules together, there is one big fat Google Drive with all of the goodies from the course all in one place. It's a one-stop shop for everything, and people have absolutely loved that. So let's look at the direction of the course. We mentioned that through the entire course, all 10 modules, we address the various components involved in skilled reading. So here's an overview of where the course heads. This is a lot, so don't get overwhelmed, but I just kind of wanted to show you the different topics that we get into with each module. So you can pause here and take a look if you want to. And don't worry if you're like I was and you have no idea what some of the stuff on the screen means, like what in the world is orthographic mapping? That's okay. I didn't either. Most secondary folks don't, but it's a critical piece of understanding how humans learn to read. And so not knowing it is a real detriment to our instruction. What a shame that we were never taught before. We take a whole session talking about that and a whole session talking about all of the other important critical pieces of literacy. But to dig down a little bit more for a better idea of what each of our modules look like, we begin each session by learning about one of the progressive skills of reading. So, for example, this pie chart here discusses the prevalent issue that phonological awareness plays with struggling readers. So we discuss what all of that means in the phonological awareness meeting, which is session 2. So we would say, start off by saying, what in the world is phonological awareness? And then we would talk about what it means for older readers too. So then after we've defined what the progressive skill of reading is, then we take a look at what it means for secondary. So for example, here's a photo of an 8th grader's writing. And during that phonological awareness meeting, we would take a look at this writing and evaluate how it gives us a window into the student's phonological awareness struggles. We would analyze it together, talk about what it means. And then finally, we spend a big chunk of time each session talking about how to address it. How do we address skill gaps for students who may have an issue with the area we're talking about? So in this case, what does it look like and how do we address issues with phonological awareness? So that's just a brief overview of what a course module might look like. We address the reading skill, we talk about what it looks like in a secondary setting, and then we talk specifically about how to teach it well and shore up any gaps students might have. Here is an important piece. The major framework that we reference throughout our Getting Reading Right training is called Scarborough's reading rope. The main rope you can see is created by tightly weaving together 2 main chords. We have the word recognition shown in blue and the language comprehension shown in red. And the goal is for these skills to come together for skilled reading to occur. So we'll be spending our meetings going through each element of the rope to build our knowledge so that we can become experts at filling in the gaps for our students who may have reading deficits or for the ones who are doing well and need acceleration. You can see that the bottom portion of the rope, that blue word recognition area, consists of finite skills. The exact skills that students need to know in order to read the words on the page is known. It's finite. So once we educate ourselves about those finite skills, if we have students who aren't reading skillfully, we can pinpoint their exact issue and teach it to mastery. What a concept. I know I never had that gift when I was in the classroom. And for the top portion of the rope, the language comprehension side, we continue learning all of that infinitely. So as we learn new vocabulary and new expressions and how the world works and more about background information, all of that is infinite. We never stop learning those things. But there's a way to go about introducing those red strands such that they're accessible to all students and so that we can assure proficiency for all. We also spend a really good chunk of time talking about how literacy skills are directly tied to oral language. There must be a simultaneous oral language development process happening throughout every strand of instruction too, from the language comprehension strands, those red ones, learning how language works, to the blue word recognition strands in learning how oral language connects to its written code. And therefore, through the course, as we're talking about building skilled readers and closing gaps for strugglers, there's going to be simultaneous implication for helping our students to become skilled speakers, listeners, and writing of the language as well. So we'll be grounding each module of the course in a specific element of Scarborough's reading rope that you see here. Each month, we're also going to be circling back to the simple view of reading, which we'll fully introduce during the first session. But as a preview, the simple view of reading is a theoretical framework that shows the relationship between those areas that we just saw on Scarborough's rope: word recognition in blue and language comprehension in red. Notice, though, here in the simple view of reading, the two multipliers are word recognition, which means the ability to read the words on the page, and language comprehension, which means the ability to understand the words once we hear them. They're part of a multiplication problem. And this multiplication problem shows that students need a strength in both. They need strong word recognition and strong language comprehension skills to develop into strong readers and to have strong reading comprehension. So in other words, students need to be able to read the words and know what they mean. But those are two entirely different skills. If either of those parts is weak or missing, students will have difficulty with reading comprehension. We want all of our students to be strong in both areas. Our older struggling readers have gaps, but we need to know, is there gap with word recognition? Is there gap with language comprehension? Or is it in both areas? This is something that we talk about a lot in our course. We'll be covering how to identify where students are struggling and also how to strengthen each of those areas for students and in our instruction. We also have a lot of great resources for you. We have a Canvas page just for our Getting Reading Right work. We have tons of resources that we've compiled in there. There's articles and videos and podcasts. They're free to anyone. You don't have to be part of the Getting Reading Right course to access those. So we encourage you to take a look at our Canvas page. They're listed at the bottom of the screen. Absolutely take a look, even if you don't join us for the course. And then also, if you're a podcast listener, check out our Leading Literacy podcast. We have so many great episodes with experts in the field. The podcast is on Apple and Spotify. And interestingly, our most downloaded episode is the one where my partner Leslie and I talk about issues in older struggling readers specifically. So we know that it's a big problem. It's a prevalent problem, and folks really want to know how to address it effectively. So we'd be so grateful if you took a look at that podcast. Any of the episodes are great, but specifically that secondary one is a good one for you all. Carrying right on, we are active on social media too. So in addition to having our podcast, we also have accounts on Facebook and Instagram. So you can follow us for the latest of what's going on with literacy throughout the county and the state, and also just updates about events that we're hosting. For educators like you, we offer a lot of free things. And if you follow us on social media, you can get a heads up about those things. And as we wrap up, I'd like to have you take just a moment and sit with this quote from Kareem Weaver, who, as you dive into the science of reading, you'll learn he's a major activist for student literacy, especially for traditionally underserved populations. So take a moment to read what he says here. Let's keep Kareem's sentiments in mind as we watch a quick trailer for a wonderful documentary called The Truth About Reading. This was released a few years ago, and it addresses literacy issues that run deep within our country and really shows the devastating effects that it has on people. So let's watch this real quickly.
So go ahead, take your time going down and just read me those words from the top to the bottom.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're right.
Bought, interested, knowledge, peace, euphemism. Euphemism. Unless I really dig deep into this one, I don't have an answer.
Really hard. The answer is really hard.
This seems like elementary school. I feel embarrassed.
All across this country, kids are not being taught how to read the words.
This is a misunderstanding that has to be exposed, that the system works for most kids and it's those few that fail. And that's a lie.
Look it up, it's everywhere. You will see over 60% of children are not reading at grade level proficiency.
I was definitely hiding, keeping this secret to myself because I was embarrassed. More than anything, I felt like a fraud.
I remember I was always nervous to get called on. The teacher would realize like who would read the best. They would eventually just continue calling on that person to read. I would always struggle.
17 years I taught public high school in California. I could not read, write, or spell.
We've got large challenges here in America. No greater challenge than to make sure that every child, not just a few children, every child receive a first-class education.
The No Child Left Behind law. No Child Left Behind had us focused on standardized tests, which start in 3rd grade. So everyone was laser focused on 3rd grade and beyond, and kind of what was happening K1, 2, they lost track of it.
There's a notion, a belief that kids start to read because they've matured to the point where they're ready to start reading. Not correct.
The reading wars, should we be teaching kids phonics or what was termed whole language? The theory was they just need to memorize a whole bunch of words and that's what good readers do.
They say, no, it's all about comprehension. But I say, well, if they can't read the words, how can they comprehend? It's almost like suggesting that a child who was listening to Mozart all their life, you put them in front of a piano and you say, now you play Mozart.
The research is unequivocally solid that phonemic awareness is absolutely critical to reach your highest potential reading and in spelling. It's something that we use all the time when we're reading and we don't even know it.
It's a lot more than phonics. It's the mechanics of how to read.
My daughter's kindergarten year, I was in the classroom. I saw their teaching instruction. She had directed them away from the words. Look at the picture. Do you think it's a bear or is it a fox? It stopped me in my tracks because it was everything that I had taught myself to do to look like a good reader.
And so you have to ask yourself, if we have this data, if we have this knowledge, why does there have to be a war? When we know that the outcome of us having that debate is literally the trajectory of someone's life.
If people only knew. It just totally tears you apart.
This entire issue requires a grassroots movement of parents and educators who are angry and who say enough is enough.
We're not dumb. We're not dumb. It's not too late.
Some powerful stuff. And we don't want any student to leave our school system unable to read proficiently. And that goes especially for our older students who are going to need these skills as they embark soon on lives and careers outside of school. The nation is focusing on making the shift to structured literacy, and that same work is getting underway in California across the state. And we're so excited to offer this training to secondary teachers who've been looking for a concrete way to address the gaps their older struggling readers are showing in their content classes. So we look forward to working with you as thought partners, as learning partners, and we hope you'll be joining us in this training called Getting Reading Right, Filling in the Gaps in the Secondary Classroom. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this overview. Reach out with any questions or to set up a cohort or just literacy support that might be needed. We appreciate you. Take care.